Welcome back to Nursing Research Tips, the podcast that brings evidence-based practice to life for nurses, students, and the curious minds in between. I'm Jenny Barrow, and today's episode is all about getting your hands on the right evidence. Whether you're preparing for a clinical decision or writing a paper, knowing how to search smarter and not harder can save you time, frustration, and help improve patient care. So let's get started. Many of us have experienced this frustration. You have a great clinical question swirling in your mind, but no clear idea where or even how to begin searching for reliable answers. Maybe you start by typing your question into Google or another web browser, hoping for quick results, only to be overwhelmed by thousands of hits that range from blog posts to outdated studies. Or maybe you click through page after page of search results, only to find vague or irrelevant information. Not only is this process frustrating, it's also inefficient, and more importantly, it's risky. When patient care decisions depend upon the evidence we gather, relying on incomplete or unreliable sources can lead to poor outcomes. That's why smart searching is so essential. It's not just about typing keywords into a search box, it's about having a strategy. Knowing which specialized databases or websites to use, how to break down your clinical question into focused, effective keywords, and how to quickly judge whether a source is credible can save you time and potentially lives. By mastering the strategies I'm going to share with you in this episode, you can turn a daunting search into a focused, efficient hunt for high-quality evidence. So first, let's start with your EBP question. Maybe it's something like this. In hospitalized adults, does melatonin supplementation, compared to no supplementation, prevent or lessen the severity of delirium? That's a classic PICO question, which helps you break down your clinical question into 4 clear parts. If the concept of a PICO question sounds foreign to you, that means you probably didn't listen to my last episode. I highly recommend you go check that one out, as well as all of my other episodes, because it's going to make this episode make a lot more sense. So in that example PICO question I gave you, the P stands for your patient or population. In this case, it was hospitalized adults. The I is your intervention, which here is melatonin supplementation. The C means your comparison group, which might be no supplementation or maybe a placebo. And then the O is the outcome you're interested in, such as prevention or severity of delirium. Now, when you head to a database or a search engine, you're not going to type in the entire question word for word. That's not efficient. Instead, you want to focus on key search terms. So from my example question, the key search terms might be melatonin, delirium, hospitalized adults. Next, you want to think about synonyms or related terms because different studies might use slightly different language. For example, for delirium, some articles might say acute confusion or cognitive disturbance. For hospitalized adults, terms like inpatients or adult patients might be used. For melatonin, you could just stick with the word itself since it's a specific supplement, but sometimes it might be listed under headings like melatonin therapy or melatonin treatment. By including synonyms, you widen your search to catch more relevant studies without missing important ones just because they use different terminology. Now, here is where Boolean logic comes in. Boolean operators and or not help you combine your terms strategically. And narrows your search by requiring all terms to appear. For example, if I type in melatonin and delirium and hospitalized adults, typing that in would find articles that include all 3 terms, focusing your results on exactly what you want. So just remember, and narrows your search. on the other hand, or broadens your search by including any of the synonyms or related terms. For example, if I type in delirium or acute confusion or cognitive disturbance, that means I will get articles that mention any of those terms. It's casting a wider, broader net. The Boolean operator not excludes terms that you don't want. For example, if you want to include studies only for adults and not children, you might add not pediatric into your search box. So putting it all together, an effective search string might look like this: melatonin or melatonin therapy, and delirium or acute confusion or cognitive disturbance, and hospitalized adults or inpatients, not pediatric. Using this method helps you find a well rounded set of relevant studies that are more likely to answer your clinical question. Now that you have your keywords and your search strategy mapped out, the next big question is, where do you actually go to find the best evidence? There are several trusted, quote, gold standard databases specifically designed to help healthcare professionals locate high quality, evidence based research. Here are some of the top places to start. First is CINAHL, which is CINAHL. It stands for Cumulative Index to Nursing and Allied Health Literature. This database is a favorite among nurses because it focuses exclusively on nursing and allied health literature. It includes research articles, clinical trials, evidence based care sheets, and even expert practice guidelines. If you are searching for nursing specific evidence or clinical guidelines, CINAHL is a great first stop. PubMed is probably the most widely used biomedical database. It covers a huge range of medical, nursing, and healthcare journals, actually thousands of them, and it's maintained by the U.S. National Library of Medicine. It is an excellent source for finding both clinical studies and background research across virtually all health related topics. Next, you might want to consider the Cochrane Library. When you want the highest level of evidence, systematic reviews from the Cochrane Library are invaluable. These reviews synthesize data from multiple studies, assess the quality of evidence, and summarizing findings to give a clear answer to clinical questions. Cochrane reviews are often considered the gold standard for evidence based practice. One quick note that there are other repositories for finding systematic reviews besides Cochrane, which tends to be more biomedical in focus. The Joanna Briggs Institute, or JBI, also is a repository for systematic reviews, and they tend to be more focused on nursing and allied health. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Also, depending on your topic, you might branch out to more specialized databases. For example, PsycInfo is great for psychological and behavioral health research, while Embase offers extensive biomedical coverage with a strong focus on drug and pharmaceutical literature. These databases can uncover studies that you might miss if you stick to only more general platforms. Now, it might be tempting to start with easily accessible platforms like Google Scholar or even ResearchGate. They're free, simple to use, and they can provide quick results. But here's the catch: these platforms often pull in content from a mix of sources, not all of which are reliable or peer reviewed. You might come across preprints, conference abstracts, or even articles published by predatory journals. Predatory journals are those that charge authors fees to publish their work but skip proper scientific review and quality checks. This means the research might be biased, flawed, or even fabricated. Using such articles to guide clinical decisions can be dangerous for patient safety. Also, I do want to share one more word of warning on using AI for searching for literature. I've actually had students in the past who used AI strictly to look for sources for projects and papers. And AI came up with some great sounding articles, but unfortunately, none of them actually existed. AI is often prone to making up sources that look legitimate. They actually have full APA citations for them, including digital object identifiers, journal titles that actually exist. But if you dig, they're not legitimate sources. So please do not use AI sources like ChatGPT or other AI sources to look for references. Now, I mentioned peer review earlier, but we want to talk about why does that even matter? Peer-reviewed articles have undergone a rigorous evaluation process by experts in the field before they are able to be published. Reviewers check the study's methodology, analysis, and conclusions to make sure the research meets scientific standards. This does not mean that peer reviewed studies are flawless, but they do offer a much higher level of credibility and reliability compared to unreviewed content. When you base your clinical decisions on peer reviewed evidence, you're relying on research that has been critically assessed by professionals who understand the topic deeply. This helps protect your patients and ensures that your practice is grounded in trustworthy science. Most reputable databases let you filter your search results to show only peer-reviewed journals. For example, in CINAHL and PubMed, you can check a box to limit results to peer-reviewed or scholarly journals. Using these filters whenever possible is going to keep your search focused on high-quality evidence. By choosing the right databases and being very cautious about your sources, you'll avoid the pitfalls of low quality or misleading information, and that's a huge step toward evidence based, safe patient care. Okay, so let's say you have run your search. That's awesome. But now what do? The next step is to start sorting through your results, but with a critical eye. The first step is to start by scanning the titles. A good title usually gives you quick clues about whether the article might be relevant for your project. Ideally, it will mention the population studied and at least the outcomes measured. For example, a title like Effects of Melatonin Supplementation on Delirium Incidents in Hospitalized Older Adults immediately tells you who the participants are and what the main focus of the study was. Here's a quick word of caution about titles. Titles can sometimes be deceiving. They might make a study sound like it's quantitative when it's actually qualitative, or vice versa. For example, a title like Exploring Patient Experiences with Melatonin Use in Hospital Settings sounds like it might measure outcomes, but it's probably more likely a qualitative study focused on personal experiences or perceptions rather than measurable clinical effects. Another example could be a title such as A Review of Melatonin and Cognitive Health. That's probably a literature review rather than a primary research study. It might be useful, it might not, depending on your PICO question. So you can't rely on titles alone. If the title seems promising, but you're still not sure, your next step is to check the abstract. The abstract is a short summary that typically outlines the purpose of the study, the methods that the researchers used, the population that was involved in the study with a smaller sample, and the key findings or outcomes. Look for clarity here. Does the abstract clearly describe what was studied, how it was studied, and with what patient population or sample? For example, an abstract might say, this randomized controlled trial assessed the effects of nightly melatonin supplementation on delirium severity in adults over 65 admitted to a medical ward. This tells you the study design, which was a randomized controlled trial, the population, which was hospitalized adults over 65, the intervention, which was melatonin supplementation, and the outcome, delirium severity. All of those aspects directly relate to your EBP question. If the abstract is vague, or if it lacks important details like study design or population, or if it only talks broadly about a topic without specifics, that's possibly a red flag. In that case, you may need to skim the full article to determine if that source is relevant for your project. Sometimes abstracts leave out key information or they might be poorly written, so you need to take a quick look at the introduction and the methods section of the full text to clarify things further. Ask yourself these key questions as you evaluate potential sources. 1. Does this study actually answer my PICO question? For instance, if your question is about the effectiveness of melatonin to reduce delirium, a qualitative study exploring patient feelings about sleep aids won't directly answer your question, so you'd want to call that one out. 2. Is this the right type of study design? If you are looking for evidence on effectiveness or causality, randomized controlled trials or systematic reviews are usually best. Observational studies could possibly be helpful, but case reports or qualitative studies are not going to give you good evidence for the type of question you asked. Lastly, is the study recent enough? Medical knowledge evolves quickly. For some topics, studies older than 5 years might be outdated, especially if newer treatments or guidelines exist. But for foundational or less rapidly changing topics, older studies might still be relevant. By carefully screening titles and abstracts with these tips, you're going to save time and focus your efforts on the most relevant, high quality studies that can truly inform your clinical decision making. Once you have gotten your initial search results back, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of articles. But here's where using filters and other smart tools can save you tons of time and help you zero in on the best evidence. You can use filters to narrow your search first by date range. As I mentioned earlier, medical research evolves rapidly, so it's usually best to focus on recent studies. For example, limiting your search to the past 5 years can help you avoid outdated practices or findings that have since been disproven by more recent science. Some databases let you set custom date ranges, say from 2020 to today, to keep your evidence fresh and relevant. Also, as we discussed earlier, peer-reviewed articles have been vetted by experts for quality and reliability. Most databases have a filter to show only peer-reviewed journals. Turning this on cuts out conference abstracts, opinion pieces like editorials, or other non-reviewed content that might not be solid evidence. Also, you might want to consider study type or design. Depending on your clinical question, some study types are more appropriate than others. For example, if you want to know if an intervention works, then you should focus on randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews. If you are exploring how or why something happens, then qualitative studies might be better. Most databases let you filter by study type, which saves you from sifting through irrelevant papers. And here's a pro tip for you. Create a free account in EBSCOhost or in PubMed's MyNCBI. Setting up a personal account on these platforms unlocks some powerful features to streamline your research workflow, especially if you're working on a bigger project like a dissertation, thesis, systematic review, or clinical guideline development. With an account, you can save articles into organized folders. Instead of losing track of important papers or having to download everything, you can save articles in the database itself, sorted by topic or project. This means your curated library stays accessible anytime you log back in, and no more messy downloads or lost files. You can also set up search alerts, which is a game changer. You can create alerts for your specific search terms and the databases will email you whenever new articles matching your criteria are published. Can you imagine staying up to date automatically without having to rerun searches manually? For instance, if your project is on melatonin and delirium, you would get notified as soon as new research comes out on that topic. So, why does this matter? Using these filters and tools means you spend less time digging through irrelevant or poor quality studies and more time focusing on studies that truly inform your clinical decisions or research. It turns a potentially overwhelming search into a manageable, ongoing process that keeps you at the forefront of evidence based practice. Here are a few more rapid fire pro tips to level up your search strategy. First, you might consider using quotation marks to lock in exact phrases, but use this sparingly. Putting quotation marks around phrases like, quote, pressure injury prevention, close quote, tells the database to search for those words together in that exact order. This helps narrow your results to the most relevant studies. Without the quotes, you might get articles about injury, pressure, and prevention all scattered across different contexts. Next, don't skip advanced search tools. Most databases like CINAHL, PubMed, and Embase have advanced search options that let you combine terms using Boolean logic and or not, apply filters or search specific fields like author, title, or abstract. These tools exist to help you search smarter, not harder. Another tip is to watch for variations in spelling or terminology. Search engines aren't always smart enough to recognize spelling differences. For example, you can try pediatric spelled Pediatric, the more American spelling, or pediatric spelled Paediatric, the more international version. This is especially important if you will be reviewing international literature, which you probably will be. Also consider alternative terms. For example, myocardial infarction versus heart attack, or healthcare associated infections versus nosocomial infections, or nursing homes versus long-term care facilities. Finally, I highly recommend keeping a search journal or tracking document. Seriously, that's a game changer. Keep a running document where you make a note of which keywords and synonyms you've tried, which filters you had turned on, what databases you search, and links or citations for promising articles. This not only keeps you organized, but it also saves you from repeating work later. It's especially helpful if your project is going to span multiple days, weeks, or team members. The bottom line is searching is a skill. Like any clinical skill, it takes repetition and reflection. The more you practice, the more confident and efficient you will become. And the payoff is better patient care, stronger academic work, and a deepened sense of clinical curiosity. Now, before we close, I want you to take action. Pick one real life clinical question from your practice, or even a curiosity you've had, and try doing a proper database search using some of the techniques we talked about today. Then ask yourself, were the top results peer reviewed? Did they clearly align with the PICO elements of your question? And how long did it take to get a useful result? Next week, we're going to be tackling the next step. Now that I found it, how do I read it? We'll dive into clinical critical appraisal and how to read research articles without falling asleep or getting lost in the jargon. Thanks for listening to Nursing Research Tips. If you've liked what you've heard in today's episode, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll be notified of new episodes as they are released. If you haven't checked out my previous episodes, please spend some time checking them out. I hope you'll join me again for my next episode. Until then, keep searching and working to improve your nursing practice.